Committee to order. First item is Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Public comment. No one has approached either of us, so we will move on to the minutes from the May 27th meeting. What are your wishes? All right, and before we do that, we have 6 of the 7 members. Supervisor Reynolds is remote, and I know Chair Gibbs was hoping to participate remotely too. So Supervisor Lemmer.
Move to approve.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Poole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Now we'll move on to 5A1, approval of claims and question costs. Sam had sent that out last week to the members. Are there any questions, or what are your wishes? Supervisor Lemmer.
Move to approve.
It's been moved to approve the claims and question costs. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? If not, all is in favor of approving the claims and question costs will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to the proposed reclassification of facilities and capital management director to a deputy county administrator, public works and capital projects position. I think we delayed final action on this. We authorized the advertisement of the position to give county board members additional time to provide input or raise questions. I have not heard anything since our last meeting. Are there any questions from the committee? Supervisor Lemmer. Oh, I'm sorry. I have heard from one member who is a member of the committee.
Is there an org chart? I know you asked for one, and then I sent an email asking. Could we just go through the organization of that? Am I on the right one? I think so.
Sure. The org chart for the Facilities and Capital Management Department doesn't change in terms of their department leadership. And if anyone ever has any questions about org charts for individual departments, they're contained in the annual budget for every one of the departments. In terms of supervision, state statutes are pretty clear. I shouldn't say pretty clear. They are clear. All appointed department heads report to the administrator. So this is really, at the end of the day, I am still statutorily charged and charged under your ordinances with supervision of all of the department heads. This is a operational and administrative decision on my part that the reason it's before the committee, quite simply, is you have an ordinance that requires this to come before you. If the ordinance didn't exist, I would have done it, to be very blunt. So the idea here is to have the current position of the Facilities and Capital Management Director essentially assume additional duties really along the lines of coordination and collaboration with Parks, Rec and Forestry, Solid Waste, and Highway. The reason for that is quite simple. Those are your largest capital consuming departments relative to your annual capital budget. And in my mind, there's a great deal of opportunity for enhancing that collaboration, enhancing efficiency, and ultimately saving taxpayer costs. So how I would envision this working in terms of reporting, they would hold, a Deputy Administrator of Public Works and Capital Projects would hold similar meetings to what I hold with other department heads, and that is to check on status of ongoing projects, provide feedback relative to performance, feedback coaching, and ultimately provide the draft performance appraisals to me for final approval. I hope that answers the question. And org chart wise, nothing really is changing. The title of the Facilities and Capital Management Director is all that's changing with, again, they will serve as my Chris would serve as my intermediary with those departments to hold the performance coaching meetings, the initial meetings for performance appraisal.
And again, the board would hold the administrator responsible for the actions of those deputy administrators and for the allocation of the work within the work plan that the county board approves. Supervisor Poole.
Does this have to go to the full board for a vote as well?
No.
Then I will move to approve the reclassification.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion. Was that Kurt or Jordan?
Kurt.
Kurt, okay.
Kurt with a second.
All right. Any discussion? Supervisor Limmer.
So how will this impact the budget going forward as far as the salaries? You mentioned, taxpayer. I totally support the idea. I'm a collaborator and I do, appreciate this, but I guess I'm just looking for what are you intending to then measure for efficiencies and how will you know if you've done those?
So relative to the cost, your first question, the wage ranges overlap. So right now we have a vacant facilities and capital management director position, or at least you did. I installed Chris in that earlier. But that position, if we were to recruit for it and fill it, that range currently overlaps with the deputy county administrator range. So operationally, in real world application of this, there's no increased cost. In terms of efficiencies that I would foresee, one, it would take some department heads right now that I'm performing their appraisals for, and I would shift those to this position, which is, currently Chris has other department heads that he's performing that function for. I think this operationally makes a lot more sense. In terms of key KPI indicators on what the efficiencies are added by aligning the supervision and reporting in this fashion, I haven't given any thought to how I would know that that's going to work. We've seen that in the last couple of years. We've felt it, I think I'll say. Chris has been doing the work of the facilities director, and having that direct tie back to the capital budgeting side has been extremely important and extremely helpful. So strengthening that through this approach, I think, I don't know what that KPI would be and how to measure it, but I've felt it. It's been helpful to have that direct tie back to administration. In terms of the enhanced collaboration amongst those departments, I can give that some thought. One area where I've already seen that work is with Chris being the director of, serving as the interim director of facilities. Things as terribly interesting as tree removal. We had to do tree removal at one of our facilities that the county owns, the Sheriff's Office Training Resource Center. And rather than going to pay somebody, Chris worked with Parks to have them do that. That might sound small, but we had Parks needed work done on a park roadway. They collaborated with Highway on that. Having that direct tie back to administration to lay the clear expectations to find those opportunities as often as they exist, that's the advantage that I see. And having that position, the title be Deputy County Administrator, quite honestly, it matters. When we want to move away from, hey, we have 24 departments that operate as separate units, and we have been moving away from that, this is another way to do that. And but I'll give some thought to the KPI piece. We have given thought to key performance indicators for individual departments and programs, but I haven't given the thought to what they would be for that position.
Any other questions? If not, all those in favor of the motion to approve the reclassification will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Then motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Consideration of amended offers to purchase on parcel identification numbers the properties in the Village of Croninwater to allow right of occupancy following closing.
So I can tee this one up. Certainly related to item 5B1, to Supervisor Poole's question on the last item. This does not need to go to the county board because these offers to purchase were already approved. But the short explanation is that in furtherance of our efforts to acquire the last parcel on this overall large segment of property in Croninwater, which is item 5B1, one of the things that property owner shared was the housing market currently is such that it's so competitive, it's very stressful for them. It was stressful for them to not have the funds on hand to make an offer on another property to relocate to because the closing would not have been completed. It put them in a less advantageous position when they were putting in those offers. And ultimately, that was something we incorporated into the offer that you'll take up in 5B1. They shared through that conversation that their neighbors, the parcels that are identified in item 5A3, have that same issue. So we went back and talked with them, and they did have that same issue. And for that reason, we're here before this committee. It doesn't change the offer to purchase in a fundamental way than what the county board approved. The county board approved an offer to purchase that had a closing date, I think no later than November of this year. This essentially moves up that closing date. So again, not in conflict with what the board took action on, but it allows for continued occupancy of that property following the closing through the end of 2025. From the county side, I work with Corporation Counsel, Highway Commissioner Griesbach. There's really no downside to us. Certainly a benefit to the landowner, as I shared with infrastructure, with the committee previously. One of the big takeaways when we met with the Village of Croninwater was this idea that we really should strive to be a good neighbor, not only with the village at the high level, all of the Village of Croninwater, but also the individual landowners that we were working with. Again, no downside to us, certainly advantageous, something that they wanted from their perspective. So the request before you is to permit the modification of the offers to purchase for those parcels to allow for that occupancy, right of occupancy following closing. Again, we've worked with Corporation Counsel's office to mitigate risk through the terms of that right of occupancy, and we'll get that closing done no later than June 18th. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the administrator, or Kevin Lang is here as well?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion to approve the amendments to the purchase contracts.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Poole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Without objection, I'd like to jump down to item 5B1, which is associated with this consideration of the resolution authorizing purchase of the property in the Village of Croninwater, specifically parcel number 145270702200957 in connection with the potential relocation of the county highway facility.
All right. I'm assuming there's no objection. I can again tee this one up. So this is, if you recall back to the maps that we have shown you before and shown the county board, this is P2, parcel P2, it was the one remaining piece of property. It's owned by Eric and Ariel Shefgen. This is that parcel that I referenced before that in speaking with the Village of Croninwater really encouraged us to be good neighbors and try to work with them to address their concerns. So as I shared with infrastructure at its last couple of meetings and most recently at their meeting last week, where they considered this item and did recommend its approval. One of the concerns, I'll lay out a couple of the concerns that the Shefgens had. One, with respect to having that closing completed in such a way that they would have the funding necessary then to go and make a competitive offer. So that again is why there's a right of occupancy following closing on this parcel. That right of occupancy is through June 1 of 2026. Again, in speaking with Highway Commissioner Griesbach, that's not an operational, doesn't pose any operational concerns to us relative to site development, but it does allow the Sheffgens to consider really two options with respect to their property. One, whether or not they actually want to literally move their house. That is, lift the residents and have that move to another parcel. They would need time to do that. They put in a lot of work into that home, and that was one thing they wanted to have the opportunity to have time to do that. And second, the right of occupancy, it gives them the opportunity, the Sheffgens, the right to terminate that if they do find a home that they want to relocate to. They can provide us notice and terminate that right to occupancy. But apart from the purchase price, which we did speak with them a fair amount about to ensure that we understood their perspective, the other issue they had is the interest rate they had on their home was secured at 3%. And of course, that's not the current rate that's out there for them to get. And just for context as to why that's important or potentially important for the county board, this is an oversimplification, but the two ways that the county acquires property, one is the voluntary way, like we're going through here in the parcels we previously talked about, where we work with landowners to come up and arrive at fair market value and provide an offer and ultimately take that to the county board. The second is eminent domain. And that's the way that no one likes to really acquire property. The governments don't like to have to utilize it, and certainly landowners don't enjoy when it's used. And when you look at the process for eminent domain, one of the considerations that governments do have is that if people do have a mortgage or loan on a piece of property and it's at a certain interest rate and they need to refinance it at on a similar parcel for relocation purposes, the government needs to pay that difference in value. So it is a very viable or a very appropriate consideration for the county to look at that interest rate component in considering the offer. But I'm happy to say that, after a lot of work with the Sheffgens, I think we not only arrived at an offer that, one, is consistent with fair market value for the parcel in light of the other eminent domain concerns, but it also allows for that right of occupancy that I talked about before. This was presented to the Infrastructure Committee last week, and they did recommend approval and also to send it to this committee. This does need to go to the full county board.
Are there any questions? This is the last parcel in the planned facility relocation area. Supervisor Poole.
I'll make a motion that this committee recommends the approval of this resolution and it advances it to the full board.
It's been moved to approve. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries unanimously. What I should have done is I'm going to ask for unanimous consent or without objection if we can move item 5A4 to the end of the agenda after item 6B, because we'll go into, it's cumbersome to go into closed session and then come back out with people being remote. Or either one, is there an objection? If not, we'll move that to the end of the agenda. And then we will go on to item 5B2. Consideration of the request from Central Wisconsin Airport to establish a regional aviation development fund to advance commercial air service in connection with the 2026 budget.
I guess I'm up. My name's David Drozd. I'm the Assistant Airport Director for Finance for the Central Wisconsin Airport. I'm basically here on behalf of Brian Grebe. He's actually at an air service conference in Indianapolis right now and all that. meeting with airlines and all that to basically try to drum up additional business and service for the Central Wisconsin Airport. As your packet noted your committee packet and all that, I did attach a slideshow presentation here. I did pass out hard copies. I'm just going to kind of go through that and then touch on the big points, and then there was some questions in prior committees. I'm going to try to answer those as we go through, just to keep it a little simpler for the questions at the end. But excuse me. So basically what we're doing is we're advocating for the creation of the funding of a Central Wisconsin Air Service Development Fund. Basically, use of this fund is to implement a minimum revenue guarantee program to attract new service to the region. As you may have been familiar with, we did have a program similar to this for Novello Airlines came into the market 2 years ago in combination with the Small Community Air Service Development Program. At that time, Marathon County, Portage County, and the federal DOT contributed money, and the airport itself contributed marketing dollars to basically get a new airline in. Novello Airlines basically accepted that. They were gung-ho, everything else and all that. Numbers proved they could make it. Because of business decisions on their side, that service was no longer viable for them. They're flying in the MCO, which is Orlando International Airport. Their costs there were unrealistically high for what they were expecting. And then they had plane orders on from basically Central America, from Brazil, that were supposed to be delivered a year and a half prior. Those planes never did come in. So their business decision basically was to pull out of the Midwest totally. Our statistics, based upon every flight that they ran and all that, that service was viable. Basically, by the time they got done looking at options and everything else, trying to schedule, they were so late in scheduling, there was no option basically for people to actually book a flight. Most people that fly to Orlando are on vacation. They plan their vacations 3, 4, 5, 6 months in advance, if not more. 30-day window is not enough time for somebody to basically make a trip with a family trip down to Orlando and all that. If you're flying, just for a weekend, that might work, but for the average person, it does not. So the numbers prove it did work. The program does work, but we're at this point now at the airport. We don't have the capacity that we used to have, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. In 2019, the airport had 144,000 enplaned passengers. Based upon our seating capacity right now, number of seats available, we're lucky we have 120,000 seats available for 2025. So we couldn't even meet the demand we had in 2019 going forward. So we're definitely at a disadvantage. Also, the other thing is too, our leakage is about 70%. So basically 70% of the people that live in our catchment area, which is about a 9-county area within a geographic boundary the FAA basically goes. So it goes down south of Stevens Point, toward Appleton, Shawano, up toward Rhinelander, then back into Clark County. Basically, 70% of those people fly elsewhere, either in the state, or even worse yet, they fly to Chicago, or drive to Chicago, or drive to Minneapolis for their flights. So our business, for the most part, is leaving the area. So 30% is only retained here in Central Wisconsin at our airport. So what we're basically asking for today is the introduction of this, and basically, the next slide is, why is air service development important? Ongoing airline dialogue, that's what Brian's currently doing right now. Community advocacy, we're out there meeting with groups all the time, trying to get businesses to look at that. Basically, the constraint is it could be cost, it could be number of flights or availability. So everybody that we meet with and all that says we need more air service here. Our big corporations, Greenhex, Aspirus, Century Insurance, they're all in the same boat. They're looking for availability and all that. They can't get it here, they have to go elsewhere at times. So what we're looking at doing is basically just keeping that dialogue going and all that to try to increase our air service to where it was prior to COVID or prior to 2009, the Great Recession, whatever they may want to call it. So we're looking to get our numbers back to where they actually were at that point. So basically, a minimum revenue guarantee is basically just a temporary financial safety net. It covers a revenue shortfall versus the target shortfall. Typically, the program is 12 to 24 months. It's funded by non-airport sources. That's why we're here asking for your help. Being the owner county, I believe Marathon County is a 64% owner. Portage County is a 36% owner county at this point based on equalized values. That's why we're here first. We're asking for basically help to get this program off the ground. We have a long ways to go. Our ask is that we're looking for $500,000. We're basically looking for $245,000 roughly between Marathon and Portage County. $150,000 from Marathon is what we're asking for today. The rest of the money we're going to have to go raise locally, either businesses, foundations, trade groups, chamber of commerces, business councils, wherever we can get that support that we need to basically offer this program. So if an airline does want to come into Central Wisconsin, we may have some resources that make us competitive to actually get that airline here. Say United Airlines wants to come back with a daily service to Chicago. We have some flexibility to get them started because startup costs are the biggest obstacle that they face when they actually start a new market, especially if they're competing with, let's say, an existing airline such as American flying to Chicago currently as they do. Detroit's a big question mark. We used to fly to Detroit and all that. That's your East Coast connection from our airport. Flying backwards to Minneapolis or to Chicago doesn't work for a lot of people. So Detroit, if it comes back, that might be available to help them basically look at setting up some guarantees and all that. There's a possibility it may not be needed, honestly, though. They may say, hey, we're going to bring that Detroit flight back. We don't need your subsidies and all that. Some airlines don't look for subsidies. They don't want to do the reporting. They don't want to show basically what their numbers are and that, which is required for part of these services and all that. When Avail Airlines was flying and all that, they had to report it per flight, per cost, their cost, all the final numbers and all that, basically to get to that bottom number that we would actually reimburse them for the minimum revenue guarantee. So some airlines don't want to do that. They want to basically have that information to themselves. They keep their, profits, they keep their expenses close to the vest, and that's how they operate. So, but what this does basically just gives us a little extra incentive to do so. This policy did change in 2023 by the FAA. Before that, it was little used, and it was basically just the different variations of how people are using it. In 2023, the FAA basically standardized the guidelines, basically allowing airports and communities to basically offer these minimum revenue guarantees and all that. We at the airport can offer landing fee waivers. We can actually offer rent waivers. We can actually offer marketing dollars through our normal budgeting process that the Joint Finance Committee is meeting in September to approve and all that. We can do that, but basically we can't offer anything else to an airline. That's why we're coming here for help, because basically you're an outside entity that has to basically fund that fund that we're looking to do. Why CWA needs community support, high fares and limited nonstop options, passenger leakage to other airports, which I kind of mentioned before, which is almost at 70%. And basically what this MRG would basically level the playing field, allow us to basically get that person or that airline, that scheduler in the door to basically say, hey, we have an opportunity here. We're shipping 70% of our passengers in this area elsewhere. We need to keep them here. We're viable. Here's your rates. Here's your incentives. It could be 12 months, 24 months, or a combination thereof. Basically, it's basically a stepping stone for us to get them in the door. Without that, in today's market, especially the small market that we are in right now currently, in a smaller airport, non-hub, that's a tool that we actually desperately need. Be honest, if we weren't doing our job here, we wouldn't be here. But we care about this airport. We need to make it viable, and that's why Brian's at Air Service Conference. That's why I'm here, looking for money to actually be allocated in the 2026 budget. So. The economic impact and enhanced air service, it supports regional business and workforce development, attracts investment and talent, enhances tourism, provides critical travel connections, not for business only, but for people needing to get somewhere quick if they need to. So it eliminates them from traveling elsewhere. Basically, we can keep them in the community here. Those dollars stay in the community. Our biggest source of revenue, honestly, is parking. As flights fluctuate, employments fluctuate. When we have a charter flight, we had Sun Country charters come in today and all that, our parking revenue will actually double just in one day for the daily thing. Typically it's a couple $1,000s, it'll go to $4,000 to $5,000 just with one additional flight with 168 people. So it's fairly dramatic for us. The more people we have, the more viable we are and the more we can do for the airport. Return on investment, those numbers can go all over the board, but at the minimum, basically a $500,000 investment, which we're looking at doing at this point, will generate about $3 million in annual economic impact based upon the FAA and some of the consultants that they use. So it does return its value. We'll return actually $150,000 directly to Marathon County if you guys approve this. Absolutely not. It'll come back in a different way, but it will not come back as in cash to Marathon County. So just so everybody's aware of that. Funding strategies, local government contributions. We're here first. This is our first stop. We talked to a number of people and all that, but being owner county, this is the right path to proceed on. Marathon County, Portage County will be next, and then we're going to work our way out to the different organizations, foundations, to look for those additional funds that are available. We might get some matching grants. There's even a possibility of some state grants to be available for tourism and all that. Once we have the program initiated, some of the funding started, obviously we have a long ways to go. I mean, if both Marathon and Portage County contribute based upon their equalized value, it's about $245,000. So we're basically short, almost a little over half. So we have a lot of work to do on our side also and all that. We may not need this in 2026. This could go into 2027. But obviously, we need to get the ball rolling. This is very critical to the functioning of the airport going forward, especially with the decreased number of flights that we do have currently and all that. So risk management and accountability. The funds are only used if revenue shortfalls occur. There's clear performance metrics that's kind of explained that it's by flight. They'll exactly break everything down, what the minimum revenue guarantee would be. And then a transparent fund governance and reporting, Synergy is going to be basically taking the lead on that and doing that accounting for us, making sure all the paperwork's done, then which will be presented to our airport board, and then obviously to the counties for both Marathon and Portage counties. So basically, the call to action is to fund the Central Wisconsin Air Service Development Fund. Today, we're asking for $150,000 to be budgeted for in 2026 for this fund to basically keep our competitiveness up and basically hopefully drive some additional business opportunities in here with airlines, additional flights, enhanced service to destinations. Kind of as an open book at this point, we're looking at all options. There's seasonal options, there's additional options, like I mentioned, Detroit, getting United back. So there's really nothing specific right now in that. We're working with airlines. I think Brian had 6 different meetings this week with different airlines. Everybody's encouraging, but bottom line, it comes down to dollars and cents. Where are they going to make the most money, and where do they have the least amount of risk? Having a fund like this basically minimizes the risk for them a little bit. $500,000 obviously is not a huge chunk of change when you're talking an airline. But once again, if they see us as profitable, otherwise, this might just be enough to get them in the door to basically make the airport grow. So, and obviously, we were bigger at one point in time. When I first started, we had 4 airlines, 23 daily flights. Now we're down to 2 airlines with 5 daily flights. Although bigger aircraft, frequency definitely is down. I know a lot of people that travel for business. Frequency is one thing. There's no backup flight. You'd like to see that frequency up there because if you miss your first flight, something gets delayed on it, you want to be able to get back on that additional flight within a reasonable amount of time. So that's what I'm here for today. I guess I'm open up to questions if anybody has any on anything I'm asking for or the numbers. Bottom line, there's no guarantee if you give us $150,000 that we're actually going to get any service here. The other thing, I guess, if we do get service, and this will revert back to Avello, there's a possibility that service may come and then it may go. There's no guarantee, honestly. So, but I guess if we don't do anything, I think we're putting ourselves in a poor position going forward as we meet with these airlines and all that. Things can change really quickly, and like I said, it's even possible somebody will come in without looking for an incentive. We just don't know. So, but questions from anybody?
Are there any questions? Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This came to Triple ED, and I was a no vote, but I did say I'd take it to my neighborhood group, and I did that on Monday. And honestly, there wasn't a ton of support unless if there was a sustainability piece. So I guess I'm just wondering, is this a one-time ask? And if so, what happens when the fund is depleted? Or how will it be sustained? Will this need to keep coming back?
The short answer, I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, we'd like to see $1.5 million. We need to be realistic. We can't go ask. We don't know if this is going to work, first of all, and all that. We think it's the right direction to go. Other airports are doing it. It's actually allowed by the FAA right now. It puts us at a disadvantage if we don't have it. Are we going to ask again down the road if something, say, I'll just use a Novello as a case, comes in 2 years later, that service pulls out, are we back here asking for more money? Possible, I guess. I can't say no. That would be incorrect. So, but I guess working for the airport, our due diligence is to basically make this airport the premier airport in the area, keep the facilities up. I mean, that's what we're doing, is we're operating the airport. That's our mission, and that's why we're here, just putting ourselves in the best position. I hope we wouldn't be back, be honest. I don't get here too often, tell the truth, for a couple bonding things once in a while, and it doesn't happen very often. So I'd like to say no, but I can't guarantee that, to be honest.
Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that was a similar question that Brian answered at the committees, and I can't remember his exact answer, but I know it was one thing when he brought this proposal to me and I suggested taking it to the various committees along with Chair Gibbs and Chair Robinson and Vice Chair Dickinson. He has given thought to how to structure the program to mitigate risk. As Dave said, and Brian was pretty clear throughout his last presentations to each of those, both infrastructure and then the Extension Education Economic Development Committee, there is risk. There's always risk that an airline will come and could go. But the idea of making the fund as sustainable as possible and mitigating risk, one of the things that Brian shared is a strategy he would be working through with Synergy is how do you calculate when an airline would have authority under the agreement to tap into the minimum revenue guarantee? Is it measured by per flight? Like, so, hey, today I had a flight and I had a low load factor, so not many people. I didn't make money on the flight, so I tap into the fund. Or do you do it over a span of time? To say, hey, maybe you have a couple flights that don't make money, but on balance, I had a really good month. I made money on 15 of my 20 flights. If you make money over the month, maybe you don't have the ability to tap in, and it's how you measure when they are able to tap into the fund. I think to your question, Supervisor Lemmer, that's one way that you stretch the availability of those dollars that I think Brian, I don't know that he has all the details worked out, but that's one thing he is thinking about. Your second question about what happens when the fund is, if the fund is depleted and the airport comes back, the airport board would suggest to come back to the counties and other regional stakeholders. As is often my refrain to committees, I say that is entirely up to the board. You allocate money. And if you decide that, hey, this is a one-time deal, you make the decision that it's a one-time deal. Alternatively, if you decide, hey, as some other regional airports have done, hey, we're going to do this on pick a recurring cycle, you have the authority to do that as well. Those are not staff decisions. I don't allocate money, you do. So I guess my answer to your question there is that is entirely dependent on the will of the board. But the request, as I understand it right now, is for the administrator to build it into the 2026 budget that Marathon County set aside $150,000 with the idea that the same conversation would happen with Portage to get their proportional share that Dave referenced, and then the remaining 50% of that $500,000. So Portage and Marathon added together would be $250,000. And Synergy would be seeking that external $250,000. I don't know if any of that, is that accurate, Dave?
Couple other comments too, I guess, and all that. When Avelo Airlines did leave, they basically lived up to their contract. We were able to back bill them for landing fees and also per turn fees, which basically covers the cost of our concourse, jet bridges, everything else. In the scheme of things, it's not the whole grant coming back, obviously, but we do have some recourse on that. Obviously, we're not on the county levy. We have no intention of going on the county levy. That's, I guess, never say never, as I was told years ago. But our intention is never to go on the county levy, if at all possible. But once again, this is kind of from my standpoint, this is almost asking for a little county levy money for 1 year for basically a startup fund. And as Lance alluded to how this operates in the future, like I said, I don't know for sure. I'd like to think we wouldn't be back here. Could be recurring every 5 years. Say we have 2 airlines that are interested in coming back. Would we come back for an additional $500,000 asking for some county support? Possible, I guess. Obviously, that'd be the betterment of the airport in the long run. We have sales tax dollars coming back to the county, the state. Obviously, money does flow back from an economic standpoint. How you measure that exactly, based upon the exact numbers, I guess is too many assumptions looking forward. I mean, overall, if this fund does work like we're anticipating and hoping it does, the benefit will greatly outweigh the risk. But once again, there is no guarantee, though.
I'd like to just interject. After our meeting last year with Portage County Finance Committee and the Airport Board, both Chair Gibbs and I had concerns relative to the future viability of the airport, given the 2 carriers and 5 flights. I think we need to do something to strengthen that airport. I think we talked about, and I had a discussion with John Pavlovsky, the county executive in Portage County, about trying to get the airport board and the committees together to have that long-term discussion. But I think this is I had many of the reservations that Supervisor Lemmer has relative to, are we only doing this for Fort Myers and back and forth, but I see this as a broader fund. I did reach out to Dave Ekman from the Chamber of Commerce, and he said talent retention is critical for employers, and the availability and access to dependable flights is critical. And while he hadn't been formally approached, he said they're happy to help with any efforts to raise money. They view this as an important thing for the business community and economic development in the area. And I think the beauty is we're not tying it to a airline or one proposal or one destination, but this would allow us to hopefully attract and other carriers and expand the number of flights on a year-round basis at the airport.
So I don't know if this is going to be like useful for your guys' overall discussion, but as Mike Purner, who's not here today, was bringing me up to speed on this, and mainly on the legal issue of, dedicating public funds to a private entity such as the airport, and we were kind of going through the rationale behind it and why the county can and should do this. I believe that one of the issues right now is that once the FAA allowed this kind of bypass route to do this, it kind of became an industry standard. And I think that there is right now within the aviation industry a shortage of airframes and a shortage of pilots, meaning that the airlines don't have the resources to serve all of these like much smaller communities. And so to the extent that, you even want to be considered, it seems that this is necessary. And so that was one of our legal determinations, that because the county statutorily can operate the airport, it must do and have the ability to do what it has to do in order to operate it successfully. And this is an avenue, but that was one of those considerations. So it means that if you're even going to be considered for a route, they're going to be looking to have this. Otherwise, you might not have consideration because they'll go somewhere else since they can't meet the overall demand.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you. One of the questions I had was, I just wanted to get my head around the total fund that we're seeking when we talk about government funding and private funding. It's 500,000, $500,000, correct?
That's our initial goal, is 500,000.
Okay. And then my other question, I just wanted to know, without getting too off topic and staying on the agenda, what this means in terms of potential cuts to the Essential Air Service Program. This isn't an attempt to supplement that potential cut, right? Where the federal government is starting to pull funding for these local services, and now we're going to have to pay for it with our local tax funds?
Essential Air Service has nothing to do with this, honestly, and all that. Rhinelander and Eau Claire airports are Essential Air Service airports and all that. The carriers that fly out of them basically operate with an agreement under the Department of Transportation. They get paid per trip, regardless if there's 0 people on the plane or it's a full plane. That program is actually up for review. It's been abused a little bit over the years, honestly, and all that. A lot more airports that went on it than probably are needed and all that. So they're looking at curtailing that, making some little better requirements prior to, I'd say probably about 18 years ago or so. Looking back to some of those requirements back to where they were, it got a little open-ended on who can qualify for Essential Air Service and all that. At one point, they're looking at tightening up, but that has nothing to do with us. We're not in the Essential Air Service business. We won't qualify for that. We're viable. We have a fund balance. We're in a, like I said, in 2008, we were at close to 169,000 employments. The Great Recession hit. We plummeted. Took a long time to grow back up. 2019, basically 144,000. The start of 2020, based upon the first few months prior to basically the government shutting down the airline industry, we would have had a record year. We would have been over 170,000 employments easily and all that. Here we are. We just never recouped. A couple other airports in the state of Wisconsin, specifically La Crosse, they're in much worse condition than we are, honestly. They lost Delta Airlines, which was their main carrier. American basically dropped a couple of flights. If I'm not mistaken, they're down to 2 flights daily at La Crosse, and that's not even 7 days a week. The Eau Claire Airport, Chippewa Valley Regional Airport, Sun Country took up the Essential Air Service contract 2 years ago with seasonal flights to vacation destinations, which Sun Country is what they do and all that. Sun Country opted out of that. They went with basically went back to United and running basically not even a full schedule on that either. A couple of flights, a couple of days don't have any flights, I don't believe. So Sun Country is basically staying on seasonal service next spring. Chippewa County and Eau Claire County did offer them a minimum revenue guarantee to keep that service viable for at least the next seasonal schedule. No idea how that's going to work out yet. They had fairly decent numbers last year and all that, but once again, it's an unknown at this point, but those counties did basically offer minimum revenue guarantees. I'm not sure of the details of it, to be honest, but to keep that service for the spring of 2026. So, did that answer your question? Okay.
Other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess just the one question, I do appreciate the effort to go out to the business community, the foundations and private sector for, in this case, the roughly 255,000. And so the question that I have is, what happens if the board approves the 100,000 for Marathon County, Portage County buys in, but we are not able, or you're not able to raise the 255,000 from the business community and or foundations? What happens to the county's allocation? Is the program then just scrapped, or we come back to the county for the difference? I guess, David, I'm not sure I have a good understanding of what happens if we fall short on the private side.
Brian and I actually did talk about that a little bit before he left for this air service conference and all that prior to me coming here. We think we can raise the money. We're fairly confident we can raise that additional $255,000. Be honest, if we don't, if we fall a little bit short, I think that's our $500,000 fund is just at $470,000. I think we just have less to offer for MRGs and all that going forward. We're confident we can get it. If we're close, I don't expect to come back to the county to make up that little bit of difference. Say we're 30,000 short from the 500. I don't expect us to be back here looking for another allocation between Portage and Marathon County to make up 30,000. Based on our talks with some of the business communities so far, industries and that, I think we can do it. It's gonna be a lot of work. Probably more work than we're anticipating, but I think we can do it. But we won't be back here asking for additional funds from Marathon and Portage County, at least for 2026. This is our request for this year to fund the budget.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, one additional follow-up then.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So the question becomes, do we have an understanding of what is potentially needed to entice airlines into the community? In other words, if we're at the 470, is that going to be sufficient to entice an airlines to come when they know that that's the only amount of guarantee that they can fall back onto?
I think that's a base starting point. Obviously, I know one airline, and I can't remember who it was. $1 million was the number they threw out there, but that was just nonchalant. $1 million. Was that a joke or was that real? Be honest, I would say it was probably real. I think at $500,000, if somebody's looking to come in here, there's a lot of market demand in this area. There's a lot of opportunity for an airline to basically capture a lot of market share that's going elsewhere that maybe they can't get into or don't want to get into. I think we have the opportunity here. I think the $500,000 is going to provide enough of a guarantee, along with our rent waivers, landing fee waivers, and our marketing. I think that somebody that's actually seriously looks at their business model, looks at all the backside of their flights, comparables and all that. I think we're a viable market for that, and I think $500,000, to be honest, is probably on the bottom end, but I think it's doable.
Vice Chair Dickinson.
Thank you. As chair of the airport board, I've been involved I've been on the board for 5 years. This is my 6th year there. Kind of following up on that, the way I would look at it and talking with Brian is the amount of money that's in that fund, which isn't managed by the airport and cannot be, exists in the fund to fund any airline for any service that's required, whether it be seasonal or a legacy airline to say Delta to Detroit. So that money would exist in that fund, not just for 2026, but potentially 2027 as well. So if something doesn't come through in 2026, you still have the additional time for 2027. In addition to that, we use the small community air service development program, which helped with Avelo. We come back up on that to be eligible for that in 20?
The grant's still open. We have to do some amendments to close it out and all that, even though Bella left service, with the federal government changeover for new administration and all that. Things slowed down to a crawl, honestly, on certain things. But basically, once we close that grant out, typically, I think the federal government, the DOT, likes to see about a year gap before you reapply for additional small community service development
So the
programs.
point being is that's going to be reapplied for as well at some point. So there's additional funding in that as well. So I hope that kind of answers the question. I will say this just to kind of cap off my thoughts on it. The airport board has tremendous leadership. Brian and Dave and Mark do a tremendous job at the airport. If you've been to the airport and you see the amount of development that's gone on and the improvements and the amount of financial kind of focus that they've had, they're doing a great job. And that goes to the FBO, the fixed-based operations, which is developing a new terminal and bringing in new business and all of that. So when we look at our strategic plan, the airport is one of those items in the infrastructure committee's kind of wheelhouse, but it also falls into these other areas. That's why, we're at these committees. It just seems like a very integral part of what we are here in Marathon County for so many reasons. And it just seems like this is one of those dominoes that has to fall in order to establish with the air service community that we believe in this airport. So that's all I'd have to add.
One last thing I have too on all that. Brent Jacobson, the local representative from Moseley, did introduce a bill to the state of Wisconsin. Obviously, it's not going to go through this budget cycle and all that, but he did introduce a bill basically asking for the same thing for a state air service development fund. So basically what it would do is it would match local dollars from a state standpoint, which they do with a lot of our state aid projects. Some are 50-50, some are 80-20 projects. The state will contribute 80% of a project. Or say we buy a loader, the state will contribute 80%, we'll contribute 20%. So he introduced that bill, I believe 2 weeks ago. Obviously, it's not going to help us with this request here and all that, but going forward for the next, say 2027, 2028, those dollars from the state, if that bill is passed, could help us and other airports like us in the state of Wisconsin basically get this additional air service that's critically needed. So just an additional thing. It's not something we want to count on, but like I said, that ball is rolling in that direction. So.
Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like I said, at EED, I'm really sympathetic towards the airport. I'm supportive. I travel, not all the time out of CWA. I have traveled out of CWA, and sometimes it's a good experience. My neighborhood group and a lot of other people that I deal with really feel like this is kind of a small amount of people that will be benefited, even though it brings back economic development and all. So I'm likely a no on this, but Vice Chair Dickinson, you had said that this money is for any airline. Could you just clarify, is this for any airline that's even existing, or is it just for new brought in? Could one of you address that?
It could be for either, actually, and all that. Any new service, new route. Say for example, American Airlines does a Dallas-Fort Worth connection. That would qualify under this program as a new destination. So it's a new airline, new destination, increased frequency. All those would potentially qualify. So, for example, if say, for example, Delta came back and said, hey, I want to add two Detroit flights, and I want to add one Minneapolis flight, that would qualify. And once again, it's how the contract's actually, but it's fairly open-ended at this point and all that. Any increase in frequency, availability, or destinations, to be honest, would qualify at this point. And low cost also, don't want to skip that. We have top destinations, Phoenix, Orlando, Fort Myers, and Las Vegas are basically our top 4 destinations. Dallas-Fort Worth is right there too and all that. Those would most likely qualify. Obviously, we're not going to, I know Brian alluded to last time, we're not going to set this up for failure by having some obscure destination, middle of nowhere, thinking somebody's going to come in and say, hey, we want this money. We're going to create this route for 6 months, and then we're going to walk out. We're going to make the best decision based upon a lot of factors. We have air service consultants, Mead and Hunt, that are basically pushing information to us at all times on fares, everything else. It's going to be an educated decision, and the contract be negotiated to that extent and all that. But yeah, it is fairly open-ended. There's a lot of different airlines that wouldn't qualify for this. Sun Country's one that would, Breeze Airlines, our legacy carriers, United, Delta, and American, most likely if they did anything different would qualify. You know, you got other airlines, Frontier, for example, their business model really doesn't support something that we would be offering here and all that. Spirit Airlines, obviously different type of market, those wouldn't qualify. They would never look at us anyway and all that. So we're such a non-hub airport, smaller, it's got to be a specific one. Sun Country and Breeze Airlines from a low-cost carrier are probably the two that would stick out to me. Madison just got a Breeze service and all that. It runs a little smaller plane. Like I think it's a 126 passenger plane. That could easily be filled here based upon Avello's numbers and all that by far. That plane would have been full every day, packed, plus with the standby probably. So like I said, it is open to anybody. Like I said, it is critical, I think, to the sustainability of the airport moving this forward, so.
But to be clear, it's for new service, not existing, not the existing routes that are currently running.
No, so we're not going to pay, if somebody just wants to add a flight to Minneapolis, no. Like American just added a third flight in April, just retired. Their Piedmont Airlines just basically their contract expired along with Air Wisconsin this year. Piedmont was flying 50-seaters. Now we're basically flying all 70-seaters out of American. Type of program like that would not qualify for this program itself. It's for new and enhanced air service, so.
Any other questions or comments? If not, what are the wishes of the committee? What are the wishes of the committee?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve and forward to the full board for consideration the inclusion in the 2026 budget, $100,000 for essential service creation of the program.
Is there a second? Seconded by Vice Chair Marshall. Any discussion?
Was it 150,000? Yep.
150,000.
Can we amend that motion then to make it 150,000 instead of
Was
100?
your motion was 150,000, Chair Gibbs?
Yes, it was. Sorry for misstating.
All right, and second, okay. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the request will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
Motion carries, but it is not unanimous. Thank you. Amending section 7.06 and 7.07 of the Marathon County General Code, courthouse parking. Administrator Leonard.
I feel bad following up Fort Myers and Las Vegas with county courthouse parking lots. So there's a memo in your packet on page 101 is the resolution. The memo is on page 101 and goes for a couple of pages. Short explanation here. I think the memo speaks for itself. I'm asking you to modify your existing ordinance on courthouse parking. It is voluminous, overly complex, and not working. So I'm asking you to have the authority to fix it. The redlined ordinances are in your packet as well. As I indicated in my memo, our current process is very employee intense in terms of the amount of work that's required to do it. It requires parking spots be assigned based on shifts that really have no reason to have them assigned. It doesn't assign parking spots based on operational need, and it doesn't give departments the flexibility that I think would be well served by having. So, and as I said, it's extremely burdensome. If we had historically 150 plus spots, we have closer to 190 spots now on this that are available for us to use. If one person left, it's like the daisy chain of emails. Do you want the spot? No, go to the next person. So please, this is entirely operational. Again, if I had the authority and it wasn't enshrined in ordinance, it would have been done already. Happy to answer any questions. Apart from everything I've said thus far, it'll save money.
Supervisor
Mr.
Marshall.
Chairman, motion to approve.
Before you do,
I noticed that it said there's a certain amount that's going to be public parking versus employee parking. How many spaces are you planning to do for public?
So the public parking is still going to stay on the current site it is. This really just relates to the spots that have always been non-public staff parking areas. So it doesn't impact the availability of public spots to the public at all.
Thank you.
Supervisor Hart.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to know the rationale of restricting parking on the, on River Drive and Thomas Street. What was the what's the exact reason that we're restricting parking there?
The Thomas Street buildings are owned by the county, going to be vacant. Well, they are vacant, soon to be fully vacant soon, and I assume you want to redevelop them. And I don't want to have members of the public believing they get to park on spots that, quite honestly, shortly are going to be, hopefully, redeveloped. So that's the reason. Without expressed permission from our Facilities and Capital Management Department.
I would anticipate as part of that the facilities manager would give permission to the credit union, given their ongoing operations for parking.
That is correct. And then we also have more information than you probably know, but we have library staff that park on our River Drive parking lots. Our plan is we actually provided, in anticipation of you adopting this, provided the written permission for them to continue parking there. And we are working, I'm going to be engaging the city to try to develop some alternative strategies in anticipation of the divestment of River Drive.
Supervisor Hart.
And then I also wanted to know how that'll impact Whitewater Park, because I know a lot of people park in one of the River Drive facilities to access that park. Is there some sort of agreement with the Parks Department to allow people to park there?
We haven't brought that up about the Whitewater Park.
And sorry, I asked specifically because this is, when I go for runs, that's one of my paths, and I know a lot of people park in that exact area to access the park, because there really isn't a good parking area. That's why I'm a little concerned about this, because once you get past the railroads, parking in that lower area gets kind of sticky, because you can't quite park on the street. You can park in the city parks, but there's limited. I know during the farmers markets, I imagine a lot of people will park in River Drive and will be restricted. And I also am concerned about the impacts on the sheriff's office if they're going to spend all Saturday morning ticketing people on River Drive for people that are parking there.
Sure. I think that's a very good point. That is one line, and that is the least important part of this entire exercise. So I certainly have no objection if the consideration was to move the resolution forward, amending the ordinances, particularly the ordinance under 7.07, and not make changes to 7.06, or have us come back with some additional language later. The thing I really care about and want to do yesterday is fix the parking at the courthouse.
And then just follow up. The courthouse, I'm perfectly fine with. I was just concerned with that, especially the impact on that area. And I understand the rationale of if we're offloading that, there could be a shift of like, this is a public parking lot, but all of a sudden, if we sell it, then it's a private parking lot, and they could restrict it and that. But I would hope that when we do sell that, we also take that into consideration when we make that sale too. So with that, I'll make a motion to take out section 7.06 sub 14 from the ordinance.
So that motion is not timely. If I could get a motion to approve first, and then a motion to amend would be timely. So go ahead.
I'll accept the chairman's, because I believe the chairman was making that motion.
So your motion would be to approve the modifications to section 7.06 and 7.07. You can incorporate in there under 7.06 sections 1 through 13, And that would accomplish what you wanted to do.
So to be clear, making a motion to accept the whole change minus that part, correct?
Okay, I think we're saying the same thing.
Then I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Chair Gibbs. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of amending section 7.06 and 7.07 of the Marathon County General Code, excluding section 14 of 7.06, will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Resolution approving disposition of excess right-of-way, County Trunk Highway P, Eau Plain.
So between Kevin and I, we can answer any questions, but this did go through infrastructure. This is part of the effort that you put on my work plan, the county board did, about looking for those pieces of surplus property to try to make sure we get those, whether it's back on the tax rolls or just clean up our online maps. So we had acquired some property in the town of Eau Plain quite a number of years ago. And there is a small portion of that that can be, we believe, returned to the current adjacent landowner. In fact, the adjacent landowners have already developed a portion of that piece of property. This did go to the infrastructure committee last week, and they did recommend that transfer to the existing landowner. And there's a briefing memo beginning on page 113 in your packet. And with that, I would turn it over to Kevin if he's got anything else to add.
I think everything was laid out pretty well in Commissioner Griesbach's memo, and then the resolution kind of documents what the infrastructure committee had. So if anybody has questions, I can answer those.
Kevin, do you know when we acquired that and how much we paid for it right away?
How much we paid for it? No, it was purchased though in 1954. So it was in 1954, the road went from having a 90-degree turn to putting the curve in there, and the original right-of-way that went up to the section line basically was still in place. We just purchased the entire pie shape that's in there. So it's
So this isn't a sliver. It is approximately 0.82 acres, which, are we creating a precedent in not requiring them to purchase it at fair market value that could impact us in the future? I know we're transferring, the proposal from the infrastructure committee is to do it at cost. But I think it's not more than a sliver, again, it is, it's a lot bigger than my lot in Wausau.
So I did talk about this with Corporation Counsel. The county board has the authority to sell land under the terms that it believes appropriate. In terms of setting precedent, I'll let Dan disagree with me, but again, your decisions on pieces of property are property specific. The circumstances of this situation could set some precedent if you believe they do. If you believe they don't, and you look at each piece of property differently, like the next piece of property you're going to take up at the next item, then there's no precedential value. I don't know, Dan, if you feel differently.
No, I agree with you. And the other thing, same as with the airport, just kind of like justifying, these actions on behalf of, from what I can tell, these don't really have any sort of like marketability, that you would not be able to build something here that somebody would be interested in. It would be too close to the road. It's already awkward, like triangular shape. So other than the church, I don't know that there's any other entity or party that would actually be able to develop or build this parcel. And so I don't know that it really has any other marketability. But again, too, each one of these can be considered independently by the board. And so I agree with Administrator Leonard on that point.
And as noted in the memo, the church has been effectively using that and incorporated into the use on the property for a significant period of time back in 1986, I think, according to Commissioner Griesbach's memos when they constructed the building.
Any other questions? Now, what are your wishes? What are the wishes? Supervisor Hart.
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution approving disposition of excessive right-of-way at the property and move it to the full county board.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Marshall. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Consideration disposition of surplus property at 811 North Third Avenue in the city of Wausau.
So another piece of property that is before you for a recommendation relative to disposition. For background, this is the parcel that previously was occupied and utilized by North Central Healthcare for its community corner clubhouse activities. Of course, that ceased some time ago. This is again, a commercial style lot and previous use. There is an appraisal that we received in your packet beginning on page 117. The value, one of the contemplations of value set forth in that appraisal does come back with a fair market value of $133,000. So we put together a resolution for your consideration, allowing for, in light of that relatively low value, not to say that $133,000 is not significant, but we thought sale through online auction would be appropriate in light of our past experience with Wisconsin surplus. Of course, if you have a different thought relative to the mechanism of disposition, we can do that, but the resolution in your packet does authorize staff to proceed with listing that parcel through Wisconsin surplus and empower staff to accept any bid that meets that minimum threshold of that $133,000 and take all necessary steps to finalize that sale. The one additional piece I would offer in terms of history that I apologize, I should have incorporated into this resolution. Again, North Central Healthcare had previously utilized that property and had paid for the acquisition of that property, based on my understanding. In light of North Central's offer to the county to take that property and divest it, their request was to have the funds set aside and specifically authorized to be used for debt service and in consideration of the work that's been done on that campus. That, of course, is not in the resolution. If it's entirely up to you to incorporate that into your resolution, but I think that's consistent with a lot of the discussions this committee has had and certainly the wishes of North Central Healthcare leadership.
Are there any questions or discussion? What are your wishes? Supervisor Marshall.
Just one question, is that additional debt service or would that go to our planned debt service that we're doing with North Central?
It would be the debt service obligation that North Central Healthcare has. And in speaking with their executive director, they are confident that they will be able to service the debt moving forward at least next year. They want to have that essentially the $133,000. If they're, hey, it's a little tight in year 2029, can we utilize that from the county's general reserve to fill that debt need?
So this would be, it would be on top of the debt service that we're covering for them in our current plan.
I want to make sure I understand your question correctly. So right now, the North Central essentially is obligated to service all of its debt.
Okay.
It's just the county is under the debt service repayment. The county, North Central's ramping up their ability to service the debt, and it's getting tacked on the end, if I'm articulating that correctly. So it's not as though the county is servicing debt on behalf of North Central for all time. They're essentially fronting some of the, I apologize, language not working for me today. schedule, the debt service schedule for the repayments is lighter on the first couple of years. It ramps up. I believe it's at full level in 2029.
Okay, thank you.
So what are your wishes? What are your wishes? Supervisor Marshall.
I'll move to approve the disposition of the surplus property at 811 North 3rd Avenue in the city of Wausau.
Is there a
Resolution.
second? Second by Supervisor Poole. Is there any discussion? Is there any desire to amend to include the provision relative to debt service?
Mr. Chairman,
Chair Gibbs.
make a motion to amend the resolution or the resolution to include the disposition sale price to be used in debt service fund for North Central Healthcare, seeing how they paid for the property.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion on the amendment? If not, all those in favor of adoption of the amendment, designating the funds to go into the debt service for North Central Healthcare, will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Now on the original motion as amended, any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion as amended to approve the disposition of the surplus property at 811 North 3rd Avenue will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Amendment to the 2025 budget to accept Bureau of Justice Assistance grant funds for the DA's office.
All right, Kyle and Ruth are on their way up, DA Mayo and Ruth Heinzel from the District Attorney's Office. So this is a formal budget amendment to accept grant funds. Just for, again, history here, the DA's office did go to public safety some months ago to let public safety know of a grant opportunity and got approval to proceed with applying for a couple of grants through the Department of Justice. And then earlier this week, yesterday, they went to public safety after learning last week that they were successful in being awarded those grants. Public safety recommended amendment of the 2025 budget to accept and receive the grant funds as laid out in the resolution. The grant is a multi-year grant, so you're not approving to receive all $700,000 in 2025. You're receiving a portion of the overall grant award in 2025. We would then incorporate the funds that we would anticipate receiving in 2026 into the 2026 budget process. And there is an optional third-year extension that, again, if awarded, we would incorporate that into the 2027 budget process. But Ruth and Kyle are here to answer any questions you may have about the grant and the process, but this did go through public safety and they recommended approval in forwarding this to this committee and the full board.
Sure, I can give a little overview. So this is a pass-through grant. It comes from the federal government, and then the money is given to the Wisconsin Department of Justice, and then they make the awards from there. We were lucky enough to receive 2 out of the 10 awards that the Department of Justice from Wisconsin gave out. So that's why the amount is that amount. It's actually 2 of the 10. This would extend and expand our deflection program that we are currently already doing through a grant. This would then allow us to bring in additional staff and have more capacity to work with those deflection individuals within the community. I would note that Dana Betcher is our current deflection individual. She's working a lot with the downtown officers and the unhoused population downtown, and then with other individuals with substance use concerns to get them into treatment and have that case management that goes through with them to hopefully keep them on track through the treatment, inpatient treatment, wherever that may be in the state. Sometimes we're traveling to Green Bay or southern Wisconsin to have these individuals go into inpatient treatment, and then that aftercare when they come back to make sure they're continuing with that treatment and doing well in the community. So I can answer any specific questions. Ruth is here also if there's any other questions.
One quick clarification, this is a conditional granting of the awards. I hope to hear if you pass it on to the county board to hear for sure whether or not we were granted both awards, but this is still in conditional status as stated in the resolution.
Kyle, is this the first time you've come before the committee?
It actually might be, yes.
I just want to, you've set a precedent. So the next time you come, we expect you to bring another $1 million. So just, we're just, and Sam, you'll be the gatekeeper or the person to make sure that he does that. So you're welcome to come more frequently if you bring that type of information.
And this is a grant that is all grant funded, so there's no county dollars that need to be matched or anything like that. It is fully just a grant from the state.
All right, are there any questions? If not, what are your wishes? Supervisor Poole.
Move to approve the amendment of the 2025 budget to accept Bureau of Justice Assistant Grant Funds in the DA's office and move it to the county board.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Amendment to the 2025 budget to fund $5,000 sponsorship for Allison Dairyland. I believe Administrator Leonard?
Sure. There, again, in your packet is a proposed resolution. This went to the Extension Education Economic Development Committee last week for consideration. There are some materials in your packet beginning on page 159 relative to the Allison Dairyland program. I'll give you the short explanation as laid out in the memo or letter from the Partnership for Progressive Agriculture. Marathon County has been chosen for the host of the Allison Dairyland process or program, the 79th annual this upcoming year. And we had a staff presentation from Partnership for Progressive Agriculture at the Extension Education Economic Development Committee, essentially asking for the county to consider sponsorship. As Dan alluded to with the consideration relative to the airport, the first thing we always look at is do the statutes allow for the county to allocate funds in this form and fashion? And the statutes do under Chapter 59 allow you to allocate funds as they would be utilized for advocacy for agriculture. So based on our analysis, this would meet that statutory, it would fall within that statutory authorization. The Extension Education Economic Development Committee had some discussion about it and ultimately recommended funding at the $5,000 level. I did some review of my administration budget for 2025, and I'm very confident that I can amend the 2025 budget to authorize, to provide for expenditure from that budget line for, it's called a special projects line, but I'm sure I can do that. It's consistent with some of the other, we have sponsorships, or I shouldn't say sponsorships, we have memberships with the Chamber of Commerce, and you also have memberships with the National Association of Counties and the Wisconsin Counties Association. So we have similar budget lines, but this is specifically a sponsorship as it relates to the Allison Dairyland program.
Are there any questions? If not, what are your wishes? Supervisor Lemmer.
I would move to approve the amendment of the 2025 budget to fund $5,000 sponsorship of Allison Dairyland and forward it to the full board.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Hart. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion to approve the budget amendment of $5,000 for sponsorship of the Allison Dairyland. Will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. We'll move on to 6A, overview of content of upcoming Budget 101, presentation to the county board. The administrator has included an outline in the packet.
Sure. The outline was generated from I think we're at about 35 slides that Sam and I have put together in a PowerPoint presentation. It's largely drawn from the Budget 101 Development Orientation and Kickoff presentation that was previously provided to the full board, but wanted to make sure we were hitting all the marks based on previous conversations we've had with this committee and based on your experience previously going through the orientation. So if there's anything we're missing, let us know. Certainly the presentation will allow for the opportunity for questions. We've added a couple of things, most notably expanding the conversation on fund balance and working capital. Updated, of course, all of the numbers relative to shared revenue, sales tax projections. But largely, the content is similar to what was in the previous orientation, but there are some areas where we certainly, based on your previous feedback, kind of added a little bit of substance to them.
So does this seem to cover, from your perspective, are we missing anything that you think we should be covering? Because this is something we'll be taking to the county board in June. And again, it begins that discussion of budget assumptions and budget priorities that will guide the administrator in the setting of the 2026 budget, with the county board being the ultimate arbitrator or decision maker relative to that budget and the priorities. But I do want, Sam will have the fund balance policy for our next meeting. So we will have that, hopefully a near final, maybe final fund balance policy that we can take in at the time that we're having the discussion with the board, which was, I think, a critical issue from last year's budget, where people were asking for clarification of the fund balance. So we'll have that in place when we go, or we'll have it near final, if not in place. Anything else that we're missing? I think if you want to reflect on it, if you have any concerns, please let the administrator know soon. Vice Chair Marshall.
Since human resources or salaries are our biggest, or one of our biggest expenses, perhaps to have what are our current FTEs compared to budget, just to know where we're at looking forward into next year.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to see in there? Supervisor Lumber.
I'm just looking at the budget message from 2025, and on page 8, you have a paragraph in there that talks about how you directed departments to strive to deliver zero increase non-payroll operating levy budgets. I think it would be important for me, anyway, to know what you tell staff as you're developing this, so we can make, our any changes or amendments we want in light of that, in light of how you direct staff behind the scenes.
Sure, I can say with respect to that, I don't develop that message until after I get a lot of the guidance relative to budget priorities and assumptions, but certainly happy to kind of share the general marching orders that Sam and I will put together.
Anything else? We've sort of put some contingencies of what's happening at the federal and the state level in there. We may not know where those are at the time that we do the presentation, but it is a process that is evolving as we work on our next budget. Anything else? If not, thank you for doing this. Update on the effects to address the delinquent tax parcels, and there's a report in there, Administrator Leonard.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. So since your last meeting where you authorized some amendments to the existing ordinance, I think we made a lot of good progress. We had letters go out in April and letters that went out in May. The letters that went out in April, essentially, I think positive takeaway, I'm a big looking for silver linings guy. After we reviewed the letters that were sent out in April, we reviewed those in May and kind of took stock of the process. We essentially are able to shave off from what had been our in-rem process based on my analysis with Corporation Counsel. I think we can cut off 90 days and make that much quicker. That said, the letters we sent in April were the letters that laid out the old process that still had that additional 90 days on there. But thankfully, the letters that once you approved the changes in May, we made modifications to the letters that actually went out at the end of May to shorten that up. And essentially what we did is we changed our approach for the 43 letters that went out at the end of May. We moved away from in-rem and went to tax deed. So with the team that I put together to kind of really evaluate our options, we're going to utilize essentially these two batches to really better understand what the advantages or potential advantages are to either process in light of the various types of properties we might be taking. But we wanted to give you a bit of an update in terms of where we are right now, in terms of what's in process and what's remaining. So a couple of highlights just to bring your attention to the slivers or orphans that were previously referenced by Committee Chair Robinson. Our intent right now is to really deal with those separately. Through my thought right now is one batch. I have Corporation Counsel's office doing some legal research on that, because as I view it, the deciding factor on our approach with those is going to be whether or not we can have a specific strategy with regard to divestment. That is, can we approach, if there's a sliver or orphan parcel, and let's give an example would be we have two rectangular parcels that abut each other, and there's a small corner out of one of them that is an orphan. I don't want to make it overly complex and approach both landowners and say, let's split this small corner into half and give it to each of you. I would really like to say, hey, there's one, this really makes most sense to go back to one of the rectangles that has the corner missing. And the legal question is, can we do that? So I have Corporation Counsel doing that. So the slivers and orphans will move forward and have specific recommendations, if we're able to do it, to this committee on what divestment would look like. But my big goal is to target the kind of the last bullet in that preliminary summary section, the about 173 parcels that are eligible for action yet this year. I want to commence either in rem or tax deed on all of those. That's the goal for the team. It's a lofty goal, but that is the goal at this point, is to identify which process would best serve moving forward with those parcels. So as noted, that's the kind of the high level process we're moving through right now. The other part that I wanted to draw your attention to, we're working on building out a report to this committee so that you can see the progress we're making, apart from just a narrative where I would tell you, hey, we have 43 letters that we sent via tax to institute the tax deed process. Much more of a what parcels, the number of parcels that are moving forward in each batch, how much delinquent taxes are owed for those parcels. So we don't have final reports ready for you to look at, but I wanted to let you know we're working on that. Similarly, we're working on having a document to present to you when we do have a batch coming forward. In your ordinance revisions, you specifically have a couple of key this committee has a couple of key decisions to make. One, if we're going to move forward with tax foreclosure, the direction to me is move forward with all foreclosure, either in rem or tax deed processes on eligible parcels, unless this committee tells me otherwise. So I want to bring to you, if I think it makes sense, X parcel we shouldn't take for whatever reason. That's not a decision for me to make, that's a decision for you to make. So I want to bring those specific parcels forward for you to consider. I already alluded to method of sale. So if there are some parcels that perhaps in my contemplation are not, like the slivers, for example, let's not put those on Wisconsin surplus. That's not in our long-term best interest to put a sliver on surplus, but rather I will bring forward a list and be very specific with what is the method of divestment that we're proposing for your consideration. And then lastly, if we are divesting any properties, one of the areas that you incorporated into the ordinance is that idea of a deed restriction. But again, that's a decision for you to make, not for me. I'll bring forward a recommendation, but ultimately, the report will have specific areas for the committee to act.
So do we have an understanding of how the slivers were acquired? You know, my only concern with, with just quick claim deeding them to an adjacent property owner or whatever would be the potential Hennepin follow-up if somebody could come back and put a claim in relative to the value of that property.
I think that's one of the areas that Corporation Counsel has to look into. I mean, to your underlying point, sometimes the manner in which we acquire property dictates how we are able to sell it. So you've hit the nail on the head about if we're going to take it by tax deed, are there certain requirements on how we need to sell it, or can we have a specific method of sale for the slivers? So as we get that answer, we'll come back and let you know. But certainly part of that recommendation would consider how we can mitigate risk for a takings claim under the Tyler v. Hennepin County decision.
So I'm interested in, we used tax deed, then we went to NREM, and now we seem to be going back to tax deed because we find it easier, or?
This is my sense. I can't tell you one is easier than the other. When I sat down with Mike and my executive assistant, Rhea from my office, and Aaron Andrews, who is helping us through this process, I don't know that one is fundamentally better or more efficient than the other, but I think that's one of the advantages we have right now is we have parcels going through each process. We're going to do 22 through the in-rem process through court, and we have 43 that we've already instituted through tax deed. And the reason we made that switch to tax deed was because we had already, the treasurer's office had already purchased certified mailings, which you can't change. Once you buy them, you got to use them. And the best, most efficient way for us to use them and get the letters out by the end of that week was through making the switch of the letters from an in-rem notification letter to an actual tax deed commencement letter, which was the reason we did that. Again, I'm a silver lining guy. The silver lining to that is we'll do this evaluation, see what works. And it may be one of the thoughts I had and I shared with this team was we may find that in-rem might be better suited for certain types of properties. For example, if the property is occupied, if someone's actively living on the parcel, we may find that actually going through court is a more efficient process because it gets the court on board with any potential eviction action we may need to pursue later. I don't know that, but that was just a thought I had. So we'll kind of conduct that analysis, Mr. Chair, over the next several months. But the primary goal is not only to wrap up each of those two batches, but move forward with the 173 parcels that are eligible through the remainder of the year. And I can tell you in our last conversation as a team, the initial thought we have is that the 22 letters that went out notifying those parcel owners that we would be proceeding with an in-rem action in the future. Our thought right now is to align the remaining 173 parcels with those 22 in a single mass court filing, which, putting me on the spot for math, 195 parcels. That's our thought process right now.
Are there any other questions? If not, I want to thank you for making this a priority and moving it along. It's been a long time in coming, and it's very helpful to have this report, and would appreciate periodic updates.
We'll certainly give you updates. I just want to say the team that's been, everyone listed on that memo is doing a lot of work. So kudos to them.
All right. Any Supervisor Hart?
Thank you. And just to echo kind of what you were saying, Chair, I like this formatting too, so we can actually see the numbers. A lot of times when we go through this presentation, we're given the numbers verbally and it's hard to write down. So it's really nice to actually see those numbers here and see the progress happening. So I hope that continues, and also hope to get that regular update. Thank you.
Anything else? If not, we will go back to item 5A4, consideration of offer to purchase county property at 518 South 17th Avenue in Wausau, Marathon Hall building. Consistent with a memo from the Corp Council, we need to have a healthy discussion of what we are talking about before we consider a motion.
So I can tee that up. You are absolutely correct, Mr. Chair. There is a memo in your packet beginning on page 25. But in speaking with Corporation Counsel Pierner, and Dan is here as well, the state statutes allow you to go into closed session, specifically as noted on your agenda for items under section 19.85 sub 1 sub E, for situations where you're deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties or similar situations, conducting specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons may require a closed session, or I should say do require a closed session. The short explanation here on page 25, we did receive an offer, a proposal to purchase property, namely the dormitory on the UW Stevens Point Wausau campus, from the Ethiopian Community Development Council, the Multi-County Community Center, Multicultural Community Center, essentially providing for a purchase at a nominal price or $1. They referenced that in the proposal, that they'd be open to discussing what that nominal fee would be. The proposed use is set forth on that first page of that proposal. Specifically, it's to be used for temporary housing for newly arrived refugee families, also supportive housing for college students, including international and first-generation students, short-term housing for working single unhoused women, and affordable office space for local nonprofit organizations, and finally, a community gathering and workforce development space. In short, they are proposing to make improvements to that facility following their purchase of it and renovate it for the purposes they laid out in the proposal. Importantly, from my perspective, they offered essentially as part of their proposal, a provision that the county would have the opportunity to accept a transfer of ownership back from the proposed purchaser in the event they either cease operations or no longer have use of the facility. So again, speaking with Corporation Counsel's office, the nature of the communication itself is such that it would envision a response from the county. I think that response would, should you authorize me to do that, would come through me, but I would need your direction on what that response would be. So the only other thing I would offer in terms of history, We did put out a request for proposal for a renovation of this facility back in 2020. That request for proposal sought project proposals that would seek to remodel the existing facility, the dorm, into a more modern apartment building that would provide affordable housing options to students and non-students. It allowed that flexibility. It was envisioning that dormitory style to be converted again into single apartments or multiple unit apartments. We put that out at the end of 2020. We engaged the county, released the request, but we did so after a lot of consultation and collaboration with the UW. We advertised that broadly. We engaged local developers. We actually held a tour. Our facilities and capital management department had a walkthrough with interested proposers. The UW also, I understand, shared that with developers that had worked previously with the UW system. Ultimately, we did not receive any responses in 2020. So just wanted to make sure you had that background. So again, having spoken with Mike, discussion of strategy relative to a response to the offer, a counter proposal you might direct me to provide, that can happen under Wisconsin open meetings law. You can decide to have that conversation, and that would be a rationale to go into closed session. Someone could make that motion. If instead you want to have your discussion in open and tell me, give me that express direction, you can do that. If you go into closed session and do provide me some direction relative to a counter proposal, we can come out of closed session and the announcement would be you provided direction to staff relative to ongoing negotiations. So in light of the recent Court of Appeals case, I think that lays the landscape. Anything I missed, Dan?
No, that's correct with respect to the legal landscape. The only word of caution, if you're going to discuss this in open session, is that if you're discussing these negotiating strategies, you would lose your bargaining advantage. And so that would perhaps be detrimental to the county. And that's specifically why the statutory exception exists, is to allow the county to be able to have these discussions and still maintain the same bargaining advantage as any other private party in a transaction would have.
So personally, I don't have a problem doing this in open session, but I will defer to the committee.
I would move to go into closed session to discuss this.
You need to read the language. It's on the, on the agenda.
I move that we go into closed session for consideration of the offer to purchase county property at 518 South 7th Avenue, Wausau, Marathon County Hall Building. Discussion on this item may include a motion to go into closed session, roll call vote suggested pursuant with state statutes 19.85 sub 1 sub E, for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties or conducting other specific public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, to wit, identification of negotiation strategies and the sale of price thresholds for potential sale of the Marathon Hall property. Motion to return to open session if we have it.
You'd stop there.
Got it.
All right, is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion on the motion to go into closed session? Well, we're having discussion first. All right, if not, the clerk will call the roll.
Chair Robinson,
Reluctant aye.
Vice Chair Marshall. Supervisor Hart. Supervisor Lemmer. Supervisor Poole. And then Supervisor Gibbs and Reynolds, we would move you to the
They
lobby.
need to vote, though.
But Supervisor Gibbs
Aye.
and Supervisor Reynolds.
Aye.
All right. Now you can do the announcement on moving them into the,
And now I will move you into the lobby.
And I'm just going to make a request that you guys allow Jamie Alberti from our office to remain in the closed session.
so we'll take a quick minute while I think that this might be the opportunity for